Hi everyone. So time for another My Top 5. I suppose this is a follow-on from last week's one where I was looking at my top 5 personal aphorisms. And off the back of sort of thinking about that and interactions with long-term friends of the channel and just generally just reflecting. We'll be talking about reflecting in this actually anyway, but reflecting on that video as I often do with the top 5s, it made me think about some other stuff that might be underpinning some of that. So in this video I decided to call this my top 5 improvement concepts, because yeah, that's roughly the bucket that they fall into, with a little bit of wiggle room. And when I say improvement concepts, that's, yeah, you can use these quite broadly, but we'll get onto it in a moment. That could be self-improvement, that could be business improvement. And most of these, when I go through the origin stories, have come probably from business or career, and then have become like, or come into wider usage for me. I think generally going forward with these top 5s, if I hadn't been doing it already, I think they're going to take this form where I pick 5 things to talk about, top 5 things, and then talk about their origin stories, because I really enjoy that, and I think people watching this probably enjoy that, and it makes me smile. And it's cathartic in a good way. Not that it's necessarily exercising demons, but it just, what will be a good term? Brings one's better angels to the fore. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so let's get on before I wrap myself up in concepts. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, here I'm referring it to PDCA. So plan, do, check, act. And this improvement concept is in the area of iterative design and management methods. Also known as the Shewhart cycle, also known, and a lot of people I think know it as referred to as the Deming cycle, but my understanding is that Deming got it from Shewhart. And if you don't know who Shewhart was, and I'll include the link to all of these as I always do in the description, but he was a physicist who worked at Bell Telephone Laboratories. It's interesting as well that, you know, the whole Bell Telephone Laboratories thing is a really fascinating rabbit hole to go down, and there's so many things that came out of Bell around that period, and either side I suppose, that are really interesting in exploring. I was trying to think of I suppose it in similar ways that you can think about it in the same way that a lot of people in IT think about Xerox PARC. And again, if you've not been down a Xerox PARC rabbit hole and you work in IT, you need to do it. So yeah, but anyway, back to PDCA. So plan, do, check, adjust. There's this wonderful diagram here, and you won't be surprised to know that over time, and particularly as it went from something that originally Shewhart is credited with, and then Deming embraced, and then it was subsequently applied to management practices in Japan, which we'll also get onto in a moment. So that movement, like anything, you're going to see stuff get renamed, bits added in, like it mentions up here, the OPDCA, where they've added in this sort of observation as well, just to sort of clarify this observation of the current condition between the adjustment and the next plan. Yeah. And I think that's probably just trying to make people not forget that, you know, you need to, when you do the adjustment, when you're leading in, there is that sort of something happens that needs to happen before the planning, if it's not part of it, which is to observe the current condition. Now, hopefully the planning contains that, but I think the idea of adding the O in, and that's just me, you know, thinking about this, or revisiting after quite a number of years formally, because I've internalized a lot of this. That's my point in this, I think, is a lot of this stuff you learn about improvement, whatever you're using for, if you use it enough, it just becomes internalized. You don't really think about the whys and the wherefores anymore. And it's always interesting to sort of go back and re-explore that and go, oh, that's interesting that, you know, this version has this extra bit in it to just sort of remind you that maybe you've forgotten to do a certain bit of that phase. The other thing you might find with this is this thing, if you've ever studied project management and you know sort of rudimentary project management methodologies, you'll probably find it maps quite well to some of those, if you're familiar with the sort of, you know, basement level project management techniques, and there's a sort of, I wouldn't say one size fits all, but in project management there is a sort of, I suppose, go-to methodology which people tend to learn when they're starting out, and then they learn all the other stuff, like maybe they go off and learn Prince, you know, like project in controlled environments, those sort of things. But you're going to find mappings of a lot of these improvements onto maybe other stuff you already know or are familiar with. So yeah, don't be surprised by that. So where did I first come across this? Well, it would have been through doing quality control, doing quality management. It's one of the sort of underpinning concepts. As it says here, there's lots of connections to Tokyo Institute of Technology, the Toyota production system, those sort of things. We'll get on to something else in a moment that's got connections to Japanese manufacturing. And certainly if you've discovered any, you know, quality methods, quality management in any great depth, you do end up exploring Japanese manufacturing, like post Second World War, and you'll see a list of various names that continually come up connected with that period, when there was a sort of renewed interest in, you know, quality management, quality methodology techniques, and how they might be used in various industries. And so for me, I suppose that first picked up on them when I worked in quality control in the 80s, but then around about, was it 94, when I started doing my postgraduate diploma in computing and manufacturing. The first 2 units I did were on quality methods and quality management. And so, you know, then I formally started to explore all this. In addition, and again, interesting rabbit hole to go down if anybody out there is, involved, is watching this, involved in manufacturing or systems improvement, is the whole QFD, quality function deployment thing, which is a massive thing. I should probably dig out a couple of books for a future My Life in Objects episode, actually, to flick through. Yeah, so without going into too much detail on that, yeah, definitely if you're curious, look up QFD. But to me, that sort of, and it's sometimes referred to as the house of quality, sort of grew out of that quality movement in Japan. And then through that, you may stumble across things like 7 new tools, or 7, I think what they're called, 7 new problem-solving tools versus the 7 old problem-solving tools as well. So there's this like wealth of quality improvement stuff you sort of uncover through just exploring the peripheries of PDCA. And it sets you down a number of different... I mean, QFD is vast. If you've ever done something that I'm not super familiar with, which is Six Sigma. My wife's more of an expert in that actually than me. I looked at it, but sort of balked a bit because I found so much of Six Sigma is borrowed from a lot of the quality methods, quality management stuff that I've already learned about, so I didn't really pay it much heed. But if you have looked at Six Sigma, you're probably already aware of, I'm pretty sure house quality is mentioned in there, but I think it only mentions the first one, the first house. And again, I'm doing it from memory. It's 4 houses in there, and they all feed into one another. I'm pretty sure there's 4. But yeah, QFD, house quality, very interesting. It's funny, I'm sort of smiling, Riley. So when I did my postgrad, so like I said, I did this diploma with the Open University in computing and manufacturing, and there was an opportunity to do a master's conversion. So the postgrad component, the diploma, was worth 120 points. The way it normally works out with postgraduate diplomas with the Open University, and there are some parallels, I'm assuming, with other university point systems in the UK, but how it works is 60 points is around postgrad certificate, 120 is the diploma, and then 180 is the master's. I think it's something like that. I think it's like 60, 120, 180. I don't think it's 30, 60, 90, but it scales like that. So certificate, and then diploma, and then masters. So I did do this master's conversion, which was all part of the program, but I didn't finish it. So let's wind back on that. Actually, the story is, so after I finished my postgraduate diploma, I just started working for myself, and I'd completed all the units, and was imminently being awarded the qualification. So it locks off at that point. You get awarded your diploma, no problem. So that my diploma was on its way. It just had to be verified. And eventually received it, everything like that. Funnily enough, with the diplomas, the postgrad stuff, that part of that professional program, there was no, you didn't go off anywhere and receive a certificate. It came through the mail. That's the only disappointment. There was no award ceremony for that. Anyway, so did that, went to do started my master's, completed it after a year, but then failed. It wasn't up to scratch. Now, at that point, I was just, I'm in an hour in, like, what to do. And my business has started to take off, so I just thought, I'll go with that. And I can always come back to it later. The failure that I did, there was an option to redo it, but not from scratch. With the benefit of hindsight, and why I was reminded of this was specifically because of quality function deployment. My master's dissertation was actually on QFD, and that I think, with retrospective, that was a bad move. I should have picked something else. What I should have done is spent a year playing around with things I'd learnt on the postgraduate and then done my master's conversion, which you could have done. You get a window in which to start it and finish it, but you get a year to between when you start it to when you have to submit it. So yeah, the clock sort of starts from when you start it. You're given a year to complete it, and then you complete it. And like with me, I could have resubmitted it with major changes, but just decided not to. And then I think the clock ran out on the whole qualification several years ago now. I think it was, I can't remember what the time frame was on that. But what I could have done is waited a year before I started it and then done it that way. And I should have done that, and that was a mistake on my part. But hey, it's the way it goes sometimes. So subsequently, I've got a couple of books on, like the sort of de facto books on QFD, just as a something that sort of got me into that. But yeah, that was not a wise thing to do. Anyway, so that's where that ultimately led me, was quality function deployment. But what was interesting is this diagram as well, is how standards are used to sort of lock off the improvement, which is really interesting. So yeah, the time, quality improvement, and then you've got these standards which like lock in your improvement, which I thought was pretty clever. And obviously, I have some involvement over the years with, because prior to me going into computing, I worked in microbiology for a number of years, which we were obviously doing computing there, but I was exposed a lot to things like FDA and ISO as well. So yeah, so PDCA, definitely I've internalized that over the years, and it's just a really useful improvement cycle. And like I said, you can bolt things onto this, but it's a good idea to really understand exactly what the sort of component parts require or contain, so that you're not inadvertently missing something that maybe you were supposed to have done. Yeah, and there's the sort of multiple iterations thing. I never know with improvement whether it actually does ever get solved. I mean, yes, if you apply it to, I suppose, a finite problem, but a lot of these, or at least uses I've come across, when they're used in manufacturing, a lot of times you might be constantly trying to just improve the manufacturing process over time. And again, there's a note down here about complex projects. It's like anything. It's knowing how to use the right tool for the job. So there may be other things similar to this which are better suited to certain design and management environments. But yeah, certainly a good starting point, which leads us neatly into Kaizen improvement. It's concept of referring to business activities that continuously improve all functions and involve all employees, from the CEO to the assembly line workers. Also applies to process such as purchasing and logistics that cross organisational boundaries into the supply chain. So it's just this overarching philosophy of improvement, as it says here, like change for the better. Just looking for improvement all the time. So you might see how something like PDCA could fit inside of a Kaizen framework, along with a whole load of other tools. And out of this sort of, Kaizen movement, however you want to think about it, has arisen like a multitude of techniques, of applications, things like, just in time. If you're familiar with things like, Ishikawa diagram, or the fishbone diagram. That comes up quite a bit, but all these other things that sort of spin out from Kaizen. I initially, and I don't know how much it's mentioned, but I always associated as well with the idea of making lots of little small improvements. So yeah, there's a couple of different approaches at the very least, I imagine. But I've always, when I first learned it, and again, I want to click on that. I didn't learn it through psychotherapy. I learned it off the back of basically doing my postgrad. But I'm sure the word had come up before. But that's when I learned a lot more about it. And in the context I learned it, it was framed in this idea of like just a series of small improvements, just constantly looking for improvements. And this idea of taking. So I think that stems from this idea of small things. It's sort of slightly easier to facilitate quick things where something is, there's something fairly small that's broken or incorrect, and you can, just sort of remedy that before it gets out of control. So I do wonder whether stuff like this has then led to things like, agile methodologies and things like that. If things are kept fairly small, to me it seems that it makes things fairly agile and easy to do. There's probably a connection there. And there's bits in this article on benefits and trade-offs, but a load of history. Yeah. So again, you'll find that this idea of small step work improvement does come up. And again, look, we got Deming. A lot of statistics in quality methods, actually. And a lot of very cool. I mean, I love statistics, as you probably gather, but there's a lot of really cool stuff that I learned, which I'd not come across before, even though I had that in my past. At school, been lucky enough to do actually a statistics O-level when I stayed on a year, and which will lead me, actually, I'll talk about something in a moment that's connected to that. Yeah, look, there we go again, see PDCA. This interconnectedness. And you can see we've got related topics down here. Now, Kanban, that's something I've not looked at for a long while. Oh yeah, wow. And you get Toyota are a really interesting firm to study, like do case studies on, actually. And another thing is Japanese shipbuilding from that sort of post-war period. It's an interesting thing to study as well. Okay, moving on. And I put this next, although this is more connected with education, and this I learned about this when I was doing my teacher training. So was it 98? Yeah, 98, 99 probably. I ended up just It wasn't something I'd intended to do, but when I'd worked for myself, I, initially, like a lot of things, I think I've said this before, times were hard. So I did a couple of things. One, I answered an ad for someone who was looking for IT trainers to do bespoke IT training using... they wanted to use accelerated learning techniques. That was really interesting. And then the other thing was there was they'd put an ad actually in the paper looking for sessional lecturers, or a sessional lecturer actually, to teach information management. And I'd completed by then and received my postgraduate certificate, and so I was ready to go. So, like, academically, no problem. It met the criteria for teaching on the course, and it was basically 2 units, one on the certificate and one on the diploma in management studies at East Surrey College. Very cool college, actually. And I worked for the business department over there as a sessional. So I used to just go in a day a week or a day and an evening, depending on what year it was. But yeah, and go and talk to students, adult learners that were from businesses, because they were all people that worked in industry, about management information management, project management, various things like that. Bit of statistics as well. I used to do a sort of guest appearance on what was it now? The Institute of Professional Development have a qualification, and East Surrey College were running it, as a lot of colleges do, and I went in and did like a 3-week guest stint talking about data protection and what's the other thing? Data protection and attendance, because it was it had a statistical component to it. Basically, that's why the attendance module, which was about managing like absenteeism. I can't remember what it was called now, but the little like 1 week bit that they had to do had a heavy statistical component, where we were looking at different ways of assessing disruption to a business through absenteeism, and the different methods you can use to assess that. So yeah, and at that point where I'm going with this, I had to do an what do they call it, like in-service qualification. So in further education at that point, they were bringing in things that were as a result of a report that had been done. I can't remember the name of the report. And so everybody in further education, so there's everybody that taught at colleges. This didn't apply to universities yet. So if you taught in a university, you were fine. You could get away with no teacher training. But at colleges, further education colleges, you had to have or be studying. It was just coming in. It wasn't quite compulsory, but it would be. So I got for free to do what's called Stage 1, 7307, which is a City and Guilds qualification, which gives you the required level of qualification. It maps directly back to the standard, which had come out, and I can't remember the name of the standard now. And as a consequence of doing that, I had to write 8 reports on different aspects of teaching, and they had to be reflective in nature, but they also had to integrate academic components, like what was the current learning methodologies. And one thing I got introduced to was the work of Covey and this idea of experiential learning. So experiential learning, if you're not familiar with it, is a step up from hands-on learning. So hands-on learning can be a form of experiential learning, but what experiential learning needs really to be full experiential learning is a reflective stage. So students need to reflect on whatever it is that their hands-on learning has produced. So that makes it completely different from, say, rote or didactic learning. You're taking a real active role, not only in the learning process, but what comes out of it. So yeah. And there's all these things that you can pour into that pot. And I haven't got it close to hand. It's actually in my sort of teaching book box that I have off to one side, sealed up at the moment. It's one of those sort of nice big plastic containers that are really robust. And I've got all my sort of teaching materials in there just to keep them nice. And I have about, I don't know, probably 10 books that I ended up buying, which were to some degree required reading for the course, and that way I was also able to properly reference them when I wrote my my submissions for each of the 8 units. And obviously part of that, not only when you did it you had to reflect on your own practice, but you had people come in to assess you, so you got assessed 3 times by another so they had to, basically the person assessing you had to be like someone with full qualified teacher status, QTS, which you get at colleges in the UK, because a lot of colleges are teaching post-16 students, so there's a requirement, I think, if you're teaching anybody under a certain in a certain band of courses, you have to have qualified teacher status, when it's sort of certain things to do with the national curriculum. So yeah, that's why there's a lot of people at colleges with QTSs. So yeah, if you so that was a requirement for when you assess, you had to be done by someone with QTS. And in addition to that, just as a byproduct, I got assessed a couple of times by external assessors, just simply because in being there for doing, there was something on probably about 8 years in total, you're always going to have an inspection at some point, and you're always going to get inspected pretty much. So yeah, so that's happened a couple of times. And the other thing I was going to say, you have to sit on in another teacher's class, basically. Again, someone who's fairly high up in the college, or is and again, preferably, I think it does have to be someone that's got QTS status as well. So yeah, that was interesting. So experiential learning. Take a look at it. There's not much. It's a bit of a deep dive, but again, another one where there's this, cycle: concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, active experimentation. Underpinning it. Obviously, there's ways of presenting it that explain exactly what those components do, what they are. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I've got a nice hardback edition of Kolb's sort of main book on this whole thing. I think it's a blue one. I always sort of get confused. Yeah, I was just looking up see if I dug it out and it was up on the shelf. I don't think it is. Yeah, I should. This all stuff, actually, a lot of stuff I'm talking about is great. Not fodder's the wrong word, but great stuff for future my life in objects, actually. Piaget. Now, what Piaget book have I got? The Psychology of Intelligence. Yeah, I've got Psychology of Intelligence by Piaget, actually. Anything else I've read on here? Oh yeah, Carl Rogers. Now there's another Rogers, I think, that more specifically writes about adult education, I think, as well. I'm trying to remember the Carl Rogers book I had. Yeah. I don't see it there. But I definitely know I had one. Yeah, so another one to add to interesting things to look at. And like I said, another, personal example of improvement concepts, although this one obviously within the area of learning specifically. I mean, these other ones, the nice thing with these is you can apply these to learning. These are applicable to anything. This obviously is specifically applicable to the sort of process of learning, but any form of learning, I think, any environment, so not necessarily collegial environment or anything like that, but just and particularly useful, I think. And I don't know how much I never did the particular qualification, but there's a whole thing in the UK, which originally I think called new NVQs, vocational qualifications, where these external assessors came in and actually they fall under that banner. I don't know if they're quite the same thing, but they're a vocational qualification, and these assessors come in and assess you at work as well, and you can get a different level of qualification through that. It's really good idea, actually. It's great for people that aren't inherently, that want to go down the vocational qualification path, but don't necessarily want to do like an apprenticeship, or the area that they're working in, their discipline doesn't specifically have apprenticeships. So I remember vocational qualification assessors coming in when I worked at Radio Rentals and assessing the accounting clerks there on certain things. They could do like a level 1. And when I was at East Surrey College, I met people that have been all the way through and done up to level 5, which is pretty, I think, it's a very high level. And the nice thing, and I should have really had it as a side, I didn't know I was going to go down this rabbit hole, but there's a really interesting transfer system in the UK to do with assessing the sort of relationship of different qualifications, like different levels, are level 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's up to level 5. And so it makes it really good if you're trying to design things like bridging qualifications to know, okay, well, what do I need to get a person from here to here, across different disciplines and different awards. So, compared to someone with like, who's gone down the vocational route, compared with someone that's taken more of an academic one, compared with someone that's taken a sort of hybrid, like the qualification, where does it fit on the ladder of the levels? And the nice thing is an academic qualification and a vocational can actually be on the same ladder, level-wise. So then it's a question of going, okay, what specifically are the differences within that? And you can then work out maybe what you need to get someone from one place to another. So I think that was really helpful because I've seen what can happen before that was instigated. It's been in the UK for a number of years, probably decades now. But I remember watching my middle brother, his trials and tribulations of being an apprentice in the building industry and working himself up through both vocational and academic qualifications, and ended up spending an inordinate amount of time doing these bridging years, which on reflection probably turned out to be unnecessary. So that bridging process has become a lot tighter because of that. I feel myself through, like looking at the like when I used to get my Open University qualifications, it had the map on the back of the what do they call it when you get your not your certificate, but your there's another piece of paperwork, which is your sort of course record, which it has all the modules and what they're worth and where they fit into the educational framework. That thing, it was really useful actually. It sort of made I could work out where I was on the sort of, the educational ladder and how things compared and what something was. Not so much worth is the wrong word, but where it fitted, what it fitted into. So yeah, that's one thing. It's always impressed me, the standardisation that I was exposed to in the UK education system, both as a and that's something that happened a lot later in my life. I mean, it wasn't like that when I first went to. Actually, sorry. Let me wind that back. That was the case, I think, with secondary education, in that all the exams are all standardised, and you have all these different boards that are responsible for marking the exams. So that was all standardised from when I went to school. But after that, as I went through various qualifications, like my ONC, my HNC, which was the B.Tech program, how just ahead of me everything was being sort of standardised and locked down, which is really cool, and modularised, which is even better, because I hate taking one big final exam for all your qualifications. And when you used to do like a chemistry ONC and HNC back in the day, everything was pretty much exams at the end of the 2 years. Right? In fact, I think at one point it was one single exam for everything. And then slowly they modularised it, standardised it. And when I got there and B.Tech had took over, so this would have been, 1981 through to 80, so 4 years, ONC, HNC. So yeah, 81... to 83, and then 83 to 85, yeah. That had all been standardised to some degree. I mean, the ONC was better than the HNC. The ONC was more standardised and more modular than the HNC. So, yeah, and I respond much better to the modular approach than I do to let's test everything at the end of the year. So I like it when they, a bit like the... that first thing we saw, I like it when they sort of chalk it off at a certain point in, as you're going up the ladder, you get tied off, or up the rock face of learning, you're sort of tied off at certain points. I like that. I don't like, going up a massive amount of time and there's a big fall if things don't work out. Okay, this is a big favourite of mine. Pareto. So I was thinking a lot about this actually. I use this all the time in lots of different things. 80-20 rule. Probably through the work of Duran was when I first came across it, and then, obviously worked out that it must be ascribed to someone, and then Vilfredo Pareto. So again, exposed to it through working in quality control. And then further exposed through formally doing, quality control modules in my postgraduate studies, and looking, in quite a lot of detail. But I subsequently realised the underlying principle of this, of the cumulative graph, where you're taking your, whatever it is you're mapping, and sort of adding on each time on the top to get this cumulative frequency. I'd actually learnt in O-level statistics, and we'd spent a lot of time on it, but I just don't remember it being referred to as necessarily Pareto. Maybe it was, and I just don't remember. But yeah, we did a lot of cumulative frequency work. Pareto's observation were primarily connected with population and wealth. So this idea, 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the population. Where I came across it is this idea, 80% of your product failures can be caused by 20% of reasons for that happening. So like I did a Pareto analysis when we were trying to work out why all of our, at the time when I first used it in anger, and it was definitely used before I was studying with the Open University. So yeah, definitely, yeah, I must have first used it before that. And I was trying to solve the problem of why we were having so many failures. So how can I explain this without spending an hour? So the manufacturing plant that I worked in, so I worked in a lab attached to a manufacturing plant, and the lab I worked in was a quality control department, which quality controlled everything, stuff coming in, stuff going out, all the different solutions that were created in-house, the media, various other aspects. And we used to record all these values for everything, like all these failure values. And one thing was there was this big device everything was really made from, or most of the stuff was made from, which was like a dispensing pump with 96 glass vials in it. And it dispensed out to what's called a microteeter tray, which is a plastic tray with 96 little mini test tubes, I suppose, on them. And it's used all over microbiology for doing different sorts of testing, basically. And we were using it for both media-based identification kits and antimicrobic susceptibility kits. So what would happen is there would be two people manning the pump, and it would have this base on it where you put this plastic tray in one end, and literally it was a manual operation. The first user would push the tray underneath the needles of the dispenser that came from these 96 glass vials, and then press a foot pedal, and it would dispense like a really small amount of liquid, like, millets, like, I don't know, 5 milliliters, or not even that, probably 1 milliliter, tiny amount, just to fill like, I don't know, half of the plastic, one of these little 96 plastic wells in this plastic tray. And then they'd retract it, put the next one in, push the next one in, and so on. And as they did that, the plastic trays they'd already done would push them out the other end, and then someone at the other end would inspect it to see if there were any bubbles in it, see if the bubble could be tapped out. If it couldn't, it would be rejected, and then they put a plastic seal on the top to keep it sterile, because this was in a sterile environment. Everything was sterilized, except for the workforce. So yeah. So in a positive pressure clean room, and then it would be taken away, and it would be freeze dried. And I'm just trying to think, actually, with the seals on the top, how they did that now. Thinking about it, yeah, my memory's a bit hazy on that. Mainly they put them on. I'm trying to think, actually. Yeah, in my mind, I've just amalgamated two processes. I think what happened was the person taking them out at the other end would put them on a tray. That's it. And the tray had a lid on it. Yeah, it had a lid on it, which would protect the trays that are in there. And then those would get loaded up into a freeze dryer unit, or low pressure dryer. I think that was it. And then when they were taken out the following day, they'd be sealed up with these plastic seals. That's it, yeah, plastic lids, plastic seals on them. Now, in the process of doing that, you get rejections as you're doing the manufacturing process. So what happens is some get discarded because of air bubbles that can't be tapped out. Some get discarded because the action of pushing the plastic thing into the unit mashes the plate up. And if that happens, a technician has to come in, and this is the job I used to do when I used to first work there, who was working in the prep department, and lift up this flipping dispensing unit, which is full of water. It's really heavy, and we used to have to wear these protective boots, and then lift it up, put it to one side, and then take the fragments and the tray out, and then that counts as a a failure or whatever you want to call it, like a I can't remember the exact word they use for that, but something obviously that couldn't be used, a discard. But they were all monitored. So at one point I went through and looked at all the discard records over the course of, I don't know, months, and did a Pareto analysis, because they recorded the reasons. So what I did was I looked at what were the 20% of reasons that caused the 80% of failures, and focused on those reasons, and was able to then offer advice on how to reduce the amount of damaged plates or air bubbles by sort of going through and going, okay, well, this is the reason for it being rejected. What's the reason why that was caused? So then I had to sort of go back one stage and go, okay, well, maybe there's a problem in the alignment of particular pumps, and we knew what the pump numbers were as well. So we could work out, okay, well, pump number 10, you're getting all these rejects of a certain amount. That needs to go into maintenance and be realigned. That sort of stuff. It was really fascinating, actually. And so that's a quite good example, actually, of but I use it all the time for looking at all sorts of stuff. Like, it's really interesting to see, just find out what the 20% is. 20% of causes that cause 80% of the consequences in anything. Like what, and also the economic side of things as well. If you're trying to learn a new subject area and you want to know, what's the 20% of things you could learn that will deal with 80% of the things you've got to deal with. That sort of stuff. That's really useful, actually. Is doing that. Yeah. So. And like a lot of things, the work was sort of rediscovered at a key point. And this is really, for me, if you like, the tipping point, the point at which I was introduced and really got to experiment within quality issues, and then learn a little bit more about the underlying principles behind all of this in postgrad. And then lastly, but not leastly, this matrix. So this matrix comes under habit 3, put first things first, in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And I nearly said Stephen Colby for some reason. Stephen Covey. Oh shit, Stephen Covey. In his book, and I've lost track of how many times I've listened to I've actually got a really cool tape that I used to listen to when I was doing training jobs in London, when I used to have to drive up there or take the train. And every time I went, I used to listen to this audio book that he'd done, which was a sort of, slimmed down version of the whole book. And I actually read the book after I listened to this audio book. It was an abridged audio book, but it was great because you got to hear him talk about the stuff. So what happens in the audio book is he misses out a lot of the filler stuff, but obviously the key things are covered, the habits are covered. It's just the other. He doesn't always talk about all of the incidental stories. But what I actually didn't realise until I did this video is that it's based, and I don't remember him specifically referencing, but apparently it's based on something called the Eisenhower Matrix, which could have possibly come from somewhere else. Now, my takeaway from learning it in First Things First, and we'll see that reflected when we look at the Eisenhower Matrix, put first things first, is although obviously it's important to deal with this quadrant, ultimately what you're trying to move towards is getting everything in quadrant 2, because that doesn't mean you're constantly firefighting. You're trying to get yourself out of firefighting mode into dealing with stuff that you can sort of plan for and do, and also do, I suppose. This is a little bit misleading in some ways. I think, this is, all of this is about whether deciding to do something. And the problem is, if it's in this quadrant, you can't really decide when you've got to do it. You've got to do it now. So deciding when and how. But the idea is to move it, is to obviously get rid of these somehow, and that's easier said than done. But also get rid of these through here, delegation or elimination. If it's not urgent, it's not important. So that everything you're doing is nicely in here. So, cutting back on finding out why things are urgent and important. Maybe you can do some Pareto principle. Maybe there's a fundamental breakdown in some part of the process which is creating all these fires, and get rid of them. And then that way you're slowly dealing with less and less of these and more of this, of stuff that's important to do, but it's not at the current point in time urgent. So how does this compare with the Eisenhower method? Method that utilizes principles of importance and urgency to organize priorities and workload. This method stems from the quote attributed to Eisenhower: "I have two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent." However, it's claimed that it wasn't his own insight, and it's actually attributed to a former college president. So it's come from somewhere else in turn. So using the Eisenhower decision principle, tasks are evaluated using the criteria: important, unimportant, and urgent, not urgent, and then placed in according quadrants in an Eisenhower matrix. Tasks in the quadrants are then handled as followed: important, urgent quadrant tasks are done immediately and personally. Important, not urgent quadrants get an end date and are done personally. And then you've got ones that are delegated, which fall into here, and ones that are eliminated, which fall into here. They're time-wasting pleasant activities or trivia. Well, pleasant activities, nothing wrong with those. But anyway, you get the picture. And interesting enough, this seems to be in green. So I'm assuming it's like, you want to try for things that, you haven't managed to eliminate or delegate anyway. And in some of that, delegation does involve scheduling, because if you delegated something, you need to check in and find out that it's been done. So you've got to schedule that check-in. But ultimately, is just getting stuff out of here somehow, and doing more stuff in here. Oh, recreation is in there. Why is recreation not a pleasant activity? Yeah. Oh, well, anyway. Yeah, and it goes into a bit more detail about, under here, implementation of goals. Oh, look, there's the Pareto analysis again. This is an article on time management, funnily enough. So... yeah, here we go. But yeah, again, it's something really interesting to play around with, and I tend to sort of internalise this by, I suppose it comes down to that phrase, what's it? Don't do tomorrow what you can do today. So I always try and work out, like, what stuff could I do now if I had the time, and if I have, well, I'll just do it, and then it's not there tomorrow. And then slowly. It's easier than say. I've worked in environments where it's very difficult to do this, because there's just so much stuff going off, and as a result of other people, they're just because of circumstances, it's really difficult to try and correct them, because you just don't have time to do it. I mean, obviously, you're moving towards that. But it's harder in industries where there isn't an inherent quality improvement attitude anyway, or there's no formal techniques for doing that. So yeah, but yeah, another interesting thing to internalise. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. Hopefully it was interesting to just think about these, and maybe hear me reflect on this, and it certainly made me think about a lot of other stuff as well, as all these episodes tend to do. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.